welcome everyone. We're thrilled to have you all with us. This is a live streamed event, so we are fortunate to have our video crew here who are live streaming this, and we have, believe it or not, roughly an equal number of people in the room here who are joining us online, and they will be asking questions as well during the Q&A. And Samir will be having their questions introduced. So people who are joining us online, please have questions. Please feel free to ask questions, etc. I'm Robert Putzman. I direct the Masters of Bioethics Program here at Columbia, and we're thrilled to have our first ever alumni panel, a panel that I hope we will institute as a regular event, and I assume we will. And we have some great alumni who will be talking about their experiences this evening. I would ask, though, people here, partly because it is being recorded, if you could just turn your cell phones off, we'd be grateful. We have been in existence for around 10 years, and we've had alumni who are doing all kinds of wonderful things. I should say that we are having another panel that is going to have a number of our alumni speaking on November 16th, which is going to be on bioethics and journalism. And we have some of our alums who are working in journalism and the media who we asked to join that panel rather than this one. So we encourage you to join us for that as well, and that too will be live streamed. I've asked all of our alums here to answer a few questions and to each speak for about 5 or 6 minutes or so. The questions I asked them to comment are, what do you now do? What do you like about it? Do you draw on your bioethics education, and if so, how? How did you end up doing what you do now? And do you have any advice for current students or recent alums in looking for a job or deciding on a career path? And as Tom Murray, who is head of the Hastings Center, once said when he came to speak in one of our first events, we, I should say, have a regular series called Careers in Bioethics, about once a month, that we invite you all to join us for. He said that most jobs in bioethics don't have the word bioethics in them. And I think that's something that we'll hear about from our alums. So I thought we would start at that end, actually. Or I could ask whoever wants to go first. But we have Samantha Knowlton, Lillian Ringel, Derek Aya, Jared Silverman, Marilyn Eshakena, Sarah Bechtel-Kaskaden, and Patrick Crooks. So I'll have them each introduce themselves in terms of what they're doing, and please, first of all, join me in welcoming them.
So do you want just an introduction, or you want?
No, why don't you go ahead and answer the questions?
So I'm Samantha Knowlton, and I finished the program in the fall of last year. A year ago, over a year ago.
Time flies.
Time flies. And I am currently working at New York Presbyterian and Cornell Medical Center doing clinical ethics consults. And I am an assistant professor of bioethics, which I just cannot believe.
Well deserved.
So I've been doing that for the last year. And prior to that, I am trained as a psychiatrist, so I did that for about 15 years, which is part of how I think I was able to transition into doing clinical ethics. Having some clinical experience made that transition a little bit easier. So in terms of what my job entails, I do clinical consults in the hospital. We do adult and pediatric consultations, and I work with there are about 4 of us who do the consults for the hospital. It's a busy service. We have about 350 consults a year that we divide among us. And then in addition to that, I teach the medical students bioethics and call on much of what I learned in the program to pass that along to the next generation. And that's actually really fun. I like that a lot. I'm also helping them develop their fellowship program. We have clinical fellows who come, and we have a clinical ethics fellowship that I have some brochures for, if I can put out. Introduce myself to everybody that I could. I went to all of these events. and asked a lot of questions about what people were doing, what their jobs were like, and I used the Columbia Bioethics Network, which I think is how I was able to get my job. Was, you know, just there's a remarkable group of faculty and people who come, a resource, the alumni resource I think is great. So if anybody wants to talk about fellowship, job, pick up the phone, call me.
I should say, Joe Finns is on our advisory board and also comes regularly to our advisory board meetings, and we're very grateful for his input.
Hi everyone, I am Lillian Ringel, and as some of you may know, I actually used to be the associate director of this program, and I was trained as an attorney before attending the bioethics program as a master's student, and I actually went back to practicing law. I am now an attorney in the health law unit of the Legal Aid Society. I've been there for all of 5 weeks, so you'll have to forgive me. I took some notes because I'm still trying to figure out what it is I do every day. We're really lucky if you are indigent and you live in New York. You might consider yourself luckier than if you lived in some other states in the United States. And New York has a very robust Medicaid program. So a lot of the work that I do in the health law unit at the Legal Aid Society, obviously the Legal Aid Society provides direct legal services to clients. In my case, it's healthcare consumers and beneficiaries, primarily from the Medicaid program, which is, as you'll probably hear, about Medicare from Derek in a minute, very, very complicated. A lot of what I do in my day-to-day has to do with issues of access in healthcare. And issues of access, of course, stem from issues of justice in healthcare. And I think that having the master's in bioethics has really taught me sort of how to think about these issues in a creative way and in a flexible way within the boundaries and the letter of the law. And then of course there are other issues that come up in the legal realm when you're talking about people who perhaps don't necessarily qualify for Medicaid because they make too much money. And when you say too much money, what does that mean? It doesn't mean they make $100,000 a year. It might mean, they're supporting a family of 5 people on, I don't remember what the exact number is, but let's say it's $40,000 a year. I mean, it's not a lot of money. But so then there are issues of fraud that come up. And so I do a lot of work with that. And you think someone who's trying to defraud these are not providers who are trying to defraud Medicaid. These are people who actually need healthcare services who, because of a misfiling of a piece of paper or another, might get in trouble with the Human Resources Administration. So it's really interesting work. There's a lot of coalition work that I do, and actually with Derek's organization and the Legal Aid Society and a few others, we do a lot of advocacy work up in Albany, as well as within the city. And I think, certainly the law and bioethics class comes into play, obviously, in my day-to-day job. But I think having the bioethics background combined with the legal background, as I said, has really helped me kind of manage what by the letter of the law could be very black and white issues, but then when you bring actual human beings into play, and there are real issues of making sure someone has care at home because they can't access a hospital, those two things have combined to make my job really interesting, and I am still on an enormous learning curve. I'm not sure if I've answered all the questions.
That's great. Any advice?
Advice. Plenty. Probably more than, no, I think thinking, as Dr. Klitzman said, thinking creatively about how you can use the master's in bioethics. I mean, I think,
Sam is obviously, she's a professor in bioethics, or assistant, well, whatever. So that obviously is bioethics in the title, but I think thinking creatively about ways that you incorporate bioethics into your eventual job or career is really important. And I should say, I hate the word networking, but I think that being in the bioethics world is such a rich experience in terms of that. It is a surprisingly small world, and so if you go to ASBH, the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities conference every year, you'll start to see the same people, for better or worse, over and over again. And but I think, and so they start to learn about you, and they start to learn what you're interested in. And I actually heard about my job from a friend of a friend who I met at the ASBH conference. So, I think my word of advice is just to keep an open mind and think about how you can incorporate bioethics into your career, even if you don't have the name bioethics in your title.
Hey everyone, my name is Derek Aya. I graduated, I'm pretty sure, same year as Lillian, 2015 from the Bioethics Program. I hopped in right after undergrad, so I was just excited about bioethics, and then when I graduated, I was excited to find a job and very confused as to how to find one. So now I've been working at the Medicare Rights Center, which is a nonprofit organization here in New York, for a couple of years. 2 years now, working on 3. And my main job there is in the education department, but I do a combination of education and policy work. And so I guess to back up really quickly, because you also heard Lillian talk a bit about Medicaid. For those who don't, Medicaid is health insurance mainly for people with lower incomes. Medicare is health insurance for older adults and people with disabilities. My spiel goes on automatically because part of my job is educating. So what I tend to do with my day-to-day is a combination of working on different sorts of materials, whether they're print materials, online materials, presentations, things like that, that consumers can understand, that break down Medicare, break down the benefits, break down the rules. I do counseling work both over the phone and sometimes in person. I do live presentations where I go around New York City and sometimes upstate New York to present on various Medicare topics, explain things to people. Right now is open enrollment period, so we're running around a lot, in fact. And then as far as the policy work, I do work around what's called health system transformation, which is this interesting blend of trying to figure out how to improve quality of healthcare without increasing the cost, and in many times by reducing the cost. So I think bioethics really plays into both sides of my jobs in a very different way. When it comes to the core education work that I do, the way bioethics really plays into my job is the practical skills that I learned throughout the program. So being able to read complex articles and break them down, and having the ability to write about complex things in a way such that people who maybe don't have that sort of language or don't have that vocabulary can understand. A lot of the times when I'm dealing with Medicare beneficiaries, for some of them, English isn't even a first language. For some of them, even for people who English is a first language and they're very, very, very intelligent, Medicare is just a complicated world and it's sort of a mess, and the rules are difficult to deal with. So a lot of the skills that I learned from the program around being able to decipher information and research information, so going into Social Security's program operations manuals or Medicare guidance, and reading about these things in a way that wasn't written for consumers to ever read, and then writing them in a way such that we can distribute them to other people. So that would be the way bioethics informs part of my job. And then with the health system transformation stuff, so that's a term that basically refers to attempts by providers, by hospital systems, and by insurance companies to, as I said before, increase the quality of care in the health system while reducing the cost of care. So there are several different models, from federal models that, like accountable care organizations that try to create shared savings, and sorry, I'm tossing out terminology, to like models that are specifically in the state that, like this one, the fully integrated duals advantage, or FIDA, that really works for beneficiaries who have intense long-term care needs and have both Medicare and Medicaid, and trying to better coordinate their care. So in that policy side of things, I run into a lot of the substance of bioethics, I guess, is what I would want to say. So I ran into patient-centered care, and I thought to myself, first time I saw patient-centered care was reading Zeke Emanuel in class. But the interesting thing here is that instead of reading the theory of how we should make patient-centered care happen, I'm dealing with the practicality of it all, dealing with, okay, now I have a hospital that says it has patient-centered care, and the patients don't feel that way. So what are they actually doing? Why is it maybe not the patient-centered care we want? How do we improve on it? So those are a lot of things that I work on the policy side of things. That's how the bioethics sort of informs my work there. And I guess the other thing was advice, and I think the main piece of advice I would give is be expansive in the way you think about the healthcare world. When I was looking for a job, I was mainly looking for research assistant jobs. I was mainly looking at hospitals. I was applying at Columbia and Mount Sinai, and I, for months, could not find a thing. And I fell into insurance. Insurance wasn't ever even on my mind. And then after falling into insurance, my supervisor saw that I have this bioethics background. We got a grant to do work around health system transformation. I got put on that project, and I fell into HST work. I think really be open-minded about what you consider a part of the health field.
Great. Hi, I'm Jared Silberman, and first I want to thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm honored and actually very happy to be here. I graduated with Lillian in Maryland, and I don't know what year it was. The years go fast, but it seems like a long time ago, but I'm sure it wasn't. I'm an attorney by training. I practiced law for about 35 years, and having sent with my wife 3 daughters through grad school, I said, you know, this might be an interesting opportunity to use my GI Bill benefits, which I had never used. So I was a Navy JAG reservist for 17 and a half years. And when 9/11 happened, I was called to active duty, and I was stationed at Norfolk at what was called the Joint Forces Command, J9 Experimentation and Training. And through there, I became involved with robotics and all these systems that the Navy was developing. And it was my job to make sure that they were treaty compliant, that nothing would be developed that would violate one of the treaties that the United States was in. So coming off active duty, I was asked if I wanted to take a civilian position. I formerly worked as a civilian for the Navy and in some private practice in what was called Navy Strategic Systems Programs. And that command was responsible for all the Navy systems to make sure that they were compliant, not just, you know, active duty and so forth, but everything that the Navy does. And there was a natural extension from that to the DNA and robotics that we do a lot of in bioethics. So Lillian Rengel circulates job announcements, right? So I'm on vacation in France at the time, and one of those came through from NYU. I had not yet graduated from our program here, and they were looking for an instructor, a professor in medical ethics. They didn't call it bioethics, it was medical ethics and engineering ethics. And I wrote them, I told them that I was a Navy captain, which is, like, for those of you who don't know, that's equivalent to a full colonel, and that I would love to teach the medical ethics, but as luck would have it, they said, okay, you can teach the engineering ethics. But I later got to teach the medical ethics course, and yes, everything I learned here, I brought into the class, of course. You couldn't do that. They have a rule, though, at NYU that every adjunct faculty has to be observed by a tenured faculty for every course that you take, no matter how many times you've been observed or not. So a full tenured English professor, who I shall be forever indebted to, did my first observation. and she wrote a great evaluation. I don't know if I deserve it, but well, it was great. And I live in Bethesda, Maryland. In fact, I hopped on a train. I taught at Georgetown Law this morning because I also teach it at Harvard. I taught last fall in a course I developed called Frontiers in Bioethics, and I'm teaching next term at Harvard is in their bioethics program, a course in neuroethics. So do you have a right to privacy if we can read your mind? You know, issues like that that are coming closer to fruition, I guess, you know, and not science fiction. So anyway, this being observed in the NYU program, it's better than a letter of recommendation because they actually have metrics, you know, the instructor did this, the instructor did this, you know, and it was glowing. It was that. Because I live in Bethesda, I took that evaluation to the dean at Georgia and I said, you know, I should teach where I live, right? And also, he hired me on the spot, and I teach in the law school in the LLM program. I taught this morning that the course I teach is biosecurity, pandemic, epidemic, all of these issues that we see. And yes, genetic engineering, CRISPR, you know, clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, right? You all know that, or you will very short. So it gives me I use what we weren't learning CRISPR then, but what we have here, yes, I use it all the time. What do I like about it? I like the independence that you have of a classroom. I mean, it's wonderful. I never liked office politics. You know, that was just, I just didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. So this is my, I guess, second platform. I'm 67, but I don't feel 67. I keep going. I don't think I'll ever be totally retired. Do that. Advice for you all. The networking word is not distasteful for me. I think it's a great word. Call it something else, but I will be at the ASPH next week, the conference in Kansas City. It is networking, and it's good to see what others are doing, and I'm looking forward to attending many of the courses that are offered there. I offer to you, there's also the neuroethics convention that's going to be in Washington next month. So I encourage you, make your presence there. They have student rates, you know, all of them. You should take advantage of that, and just stay active. And if you can try, if you like teaching, try to get observed where they can write a metric type evaluation for you, because that really works. So anyway, thank you, and glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Eshikana, like Lillian said and Derek said, and he said, I graduated with all of them in the same year. We were in the same cohort, and like Derek, I came into the program directly after university, so I didn't know what I was doing. I remember during my interview with Dr. Klitzman, he had asked me if I took any classes in bioethics while in undergrad. And my response was I didn't know what bioethics was. I'd never heard about it. So my background was in biomedical science, but in the UK, we were never exposed to bioethics. It's not something that came up in discussion. No type of ethics, medical ethics, nothing in the program. But the reason why I came upon bioethics is because with my exposure to research and the respect I'd come to have for people who do research, I have immense respect for people who do research. I realized that that's not something that I want to do. I don't want to dedicate my life to doing that. But it's a field that I was very interested in and I wanted to stay in as a career option. And so I thought to myself, what would I do? And I wanted higher education. So what would I do for higher education that would position me to remain in this field and be exposed to all the creative things and innovative things that are happening? So that's how I came upon bioethics. And so the field that I'm in now is research ethics, which is, as Lillian said, bioethics is a small field. Research ethics is even smaller. It's very niche. And so you see the same people all the time and you hear about the same people all the time. So right now I work at the IRB at Mount Sinai. If you're in the bioethics program, I think you will know what IRB is, but if you don't, IRB is abbreviation for Institutional Review Board. And so the IRB is responsible for reviewing and approving any human subjects research that happens at institutions. And so I'm responsible along with other staff in the office for reviewing and approving research that is done by faculty at Mount Sinai or by any other person that uses Mount Sinai as a site. And like I said at the start, I have a deep respect and admiration for research and development, biomedical research, especially research that has got to the point of using human subjects. to get results and validate the model that they have. And so I'm exposed to groundbreaking research all the time. It comes to my desk, I see it before it's even on the internet, anyone knows about it. So I'm very excited about that kind of stuff. So if you're a nerd about that kind of stuff, it's like, oh yeah. So like we have like some first in human stuff, and I'm like, wow, we're doing this stuff, and I know about it, but I'm not going to tell you about it. Read about it maybe years from now. And the program was very helpful. So in our world, what we do, and this is one reason why I think that many researchers think that we're a hinder to research, which we're not. We are your friend, and we work to make research happen. So in the IRB, we have federal regulations. The common rule is like our Bible, which was supposed to change in 2018, but it's sounding like that's not going to happen. But so we have a set of regulations that we follow. And as you know, not every regulation is written in such a way that everyone has the same interpretation. Some things are open to interpretation. So that's one thing that an IRB professional is supposed to do, right? Interpret the regs. And sometimes we find ourselves defending the regulations to researchers when they ask, why do I have to do this? You can't just tell them because the regs say so. So you have to have that kind of background to understand what's written, interpret it, and almost defend it. But then the other aspect that I think bioethics came into play for me and was very useful for me is the ethics portion of things. So you're not just following a set of rules that have been set by somebody high up there, and you're not just a processor or an implementer. There is also an aspect to reviewing research, especially innovative research. There's something that has never been done before, where you have to think of the ethical implications. And I think that without going through the program, it would have taken me more time, maybe years of experience and learning from people on the job to be able to have that kind of reasoning and think about and ask the right questions and have discussions with study teams and PIs who probably didn't think that this is something that they should be thinking about. They have an idea, they put it out, they do all the right things, check all the boxes, but then you're able to come at another angle and say, have you thought about this? Because you're exposed to, the biomedical principle, the bioethical principles. You've had these discussions, like I'll give you an example, just something very tiny as there's this PI, all she's doing in her study is collecting blood from healthy participants so that she can do some assays. And so I got the consent form, and it looked like what she was doing is, depending on how much, so she decides how much blood she's getting from people, but depending on how much blood she's getting from you, that will determine how much she's paying you. So she's paying you based on how much blood she's getting from you. And immediately I said, yeah, no, you can't do that. And so she pushed back. She's like, it's, so I asked her, why are you doing this? She said, because no one's going to do it for less than that. And so it became this whole, when I saw it the first time, if I had a conversation with her, the first thing that came to my mind from bioethics, my bioethics classes, is the commodification of organs, right? Organ transplants and organs, that's like going to 100, and I'm still at 5 here with this woman who is collecting different volumes of blood and paying them for it. But it was something I was able to catch and think about at the get-go. And I found that it took me, like some of my colleagues who don't have a bioethics background, it took me some convincing, to say, this is why I think this is an issue. Because on the surface, it's like, well, she's not harming anybody, right? It's not a risk. But then you think, oh, so you're healthy, right? You need money for textbooks. So then you go, you see this ad, you go, and maybe she needs 100 meals, and you know that if you give her 120, you will get that much more money. So, it's like, well, you can take 120, right? She'll take it, she'll use it, and then you get more money. So we get into this gray area. So there are tons of examples like that, and that's where bioethics came in. How I got this job. So I think the program still has the IRB internship. Yeah, so when we started, the IRB internship was still new and it was still being structured, so I took part in it just because I knew coming into the program that research ethics is something I was interested in. I appreciated being exposed to the clinical ethics part of things, but I didn't want to lose focus on the research ethics part, and I wanted as much exposure as I could to that aspect. So I did the IRB internship under Dr. Eileen Wheeletz, who's here right now. I love her, she's great. So her person and being exposed to what the IRB actually does is what encouraged me to pursue a career in the IRB world after graduating. So after graduating, I got this job at the IRB Mount Sinai, and so I've been there for 3 years in March, and I love what I do. I really do. In terms of advice, Jared has said it, Lillian has said it, but it's networking. Like, I got my job through networking, through Dr. Willits recommended me to the director at Mount Sinai, and I hope she doesn't regret hiring me. But she did, and it's I think that the program really exposes you to people who do different things that you might be interested in. Like me, I would say that there's a reason why you decided to do the program, because bioethics isn't something that every single person even people in science or medical science know what it is. So the fact that you chose to do the program, there's a reason why you're doing it. So even if it's not immediately clear to you, a career path that you can forge for yourself based on your initial interest in bioethics, trust me that when you talk to somebody and you find the networks, like they said, there are creative ways to find careers for yourself and jobs for yourself that will both where you will use your the things that you've learned in bioethics and also satisfy your curiosity and the initial reason why you decided to do this in the first place.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kiskaden-Bechtel, and I'm a clinical research facilitator at a public health care clinic in downtown Brooklyn. I work with Columbia Medical Center and New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in a research study that is also affiliated with the Center for Disease Control. And it's a research study that is working with patients who have tuberculosis. So basically the study is DOT, or directly observed therapy, and it's monitoring their adherence to medication, especially given concerns about antibiotic resistance, and making sure that patients complete their treatment, which can take anywhere from 4 to 12 months if they're not antibiotic resistant to some form of medication. So the clinical trial is really comparing two forms of observation. So Skype-based video DOT and in-person clinic DOT, and I really find the work meaningful because the majority of our patients are foreign-born, anywhere from coming from China or Mexico or India or anywhere outside of the U.S. It's very rare that we see patients who are U.S. born, and the DOT is really working to reduce the stigma of patients who have tuberculosis, because it is a very stigmatized field. It is a very sensitive issue, and so maintaining patient privacy and confidentiality is of utmost importance. I graduated from the Bioethics Program in May of this year, so I'm a newbie compared to these pros. And I really found helpful to my preparation into entering the workforce was taking the Institutional Review Board internship with Columbia Medical Center. And a project I ended up working on was ethical issues surrounding cultural traditions in HIV and TB African populations. And so that experience on the IRB was really helpful, as well as research ethics with Dr. Klitzman. And I've felt incredibly prepared to deal with the IRB through passing the DOT study that I'm working on now, and really feeling comfortable working through the consent process with patients and making sure that they feel comfortable, and making sure that if there is a language barrier, if they're Spanish speaking or Chinese speaking and I have to use a translator, making sure that they understand it and are fully comprehensive of the information is really key and really essential to A, complying with HIPAA, and also B, making sure that they're fully aware of what they're agreeing to and signing off on. I ended up getting this position based upon a referral from a classmate, Masha Elskamp, who ended up being a classmate in history of bioethics, and we struck up a friendship. And when I was writing my master's thesis a year ago, she said, "So are you looking for a job? I have this position. We're looking for research coordinators. Feel free to apply." So she really helped me network and get the position. So really, as has been said, networking is key. Advice, I really recommend the IRB internship. It's a great resource to really get hands-on experience in different projects, and that's it for me.
Great. Hi everyone, I'm Patrick. I graduated from the program in 2013, so I feel kind of like the veteran up here. I think that was the second year of the program. I currently work, actually, let me start over. I went into the program right from undergraduate, so once I was in the program, I was pretty laser focused on what I was going to do afterward, as were my parents. They were very concerned that I was going to be employable afterward, but everything worked out in the end. Right now, I work at a consulting firm called Quintiles. Actually, we recently merged with another company, so now we're Quintiles IMS. But historically, Quintiles is a large CRO, and what that stands for is a contract research organization, meaning that they conduct clinical trials on behalf of drug companies, and I work in their consulting arm. So essentially what we do is we work on strategy and operational engagements with clients. Predominantly our clients are pharmaceutical and biotech companies. So in the past few years, I've done most of my work in the research and development area. So we work with clients, and I spent around the first 2 years working with clients to help identify how they can accelerate their clinical trials. So how to remove roadblocks to get through trials more quickly, so that we can see if the assets they're working on are actually any good or not. So I loved doing that. I loved working with on real problems with real clients, and I felt like I was able to use a lot of the problem-solving skills that we talked about in bioethics. I remember the 4 pillars of bioethics, and that framework being kind of your go-to framework if you're stuck on a question. And I think about my job now, it's all about problem solving, and a lot of times we use frameworks to at least get the juices flowing and get really our brainstorm going about how we might solve this problem. In the last year or so, I've kind of switched a little bit in what I'm working on at Quintiles. I'm working in the realm in the past year or so in patient-reported outcomes. It's a really exciting field, and I'll tell you a little bit about it because I think it's particularly relevant to bioethics. So it's patient-reported outcomes are all about making sure that the patient voice is heard in clinical research. So if you think about a clinical trial, one way to measure the efficacy of, let's say, a cancer drug is to see if the tumor shrank. But that doesn't really give us any insight into the patient's experience, what he or she was going through during that clinical trial. So what we're hearing from a lot of regulators, like the FDA, is we want to know not only how efficacious was this drug, but what was the patient's life like while they were on this drug? Were they miserable, or did they have good quality of life? So a lot of what I've been doing over the past year is helping clients design their PRO, their patient-reported outcome strategy, so that in the clinical trial design, we can actually collect PROs, so that not only we're determining if the tumor has shrunk, but we're determining how the patient's quality of life has been through the process of the clinical trial. There was actually an article last week in the New England Journal of Medicine about how PROs are increasingly being used in clinical practice to determine patient satisfaction, and this article talked about how they're also have a way to increase physician satisfaction, because maybe while the patient's waiting in the waiting room, he or she could fill out the PRO, all of these quality of life questions, and the doctor might be able to just have that information on the iPad and might be able to skip the first 10 minutes of the appointment, because this article, I'd check it out if you have access to New England Journal of Medicine. It's also said that PROs might help catch things like depression or anxiety, or things that doctors just might not be on their immediate radar. So I've really enjoyed working in this practice, and we're seeing a huge demand from our clients in this industry, because not a lot of people know how to leverage there's a lot of established PROs, so essentially it's kind of like a questionnaire. If there's a new indication, sometimes we have to design PROs from scratch. So a recent project I did was in the field of nasal polyps. So it might sound silly, but it actually is a big issue that affects a lot of people and has a huge implication on their quality of life. So there was no existing PRO for nasal polyps. And so we actually did a lot of research, a lot of interviews with patients suffering this to determine what their life is like with this indication so that we could design the correct instrument. And this instrument is actually being used in an upcoming clinical trial so that we're able to capture the experience. So not only in this case if the polyp shrinks, but how did this impact other symptoms in your life that you're going through, like headaches, ability to sleep. So I really enjoyed this line of work, and I think it's an exciting topic in healthcare because it's all about incorporating the patient perspective and making sure clinical research and clinical practice are take into account the patient experience. So when I think about applying what I learned in bioethics, again, I think it's the problem solving. It's being okay with ambiguity and understanding that there's not always a right or wrong answer, but using frameworks, using different tools to solve problems. So because I went right from school to the bioethics program and into the workforce, so my advice for anyone else in a similar situation is to practice your elevator pitch. When I was interviewing at first, I was shocked about how the word bioethics on my resume really just almost made people go what is this? And I was surprised because to me it's kind of self-explanatory. It's ethics, it's ethics and science. So after these first few interviews, I realized I really need to practice my elevator pitch. I practiced it with classmates. I practiced it with friends. And essentially my elevator pitch was something like, because when you're in an interview. When you have this field, you need to be able to sell yourself. You need to be able to say, this is where I came from, this is why I studied bioethics, this is why I think it's going to help me in this job, and here are my examples. So I remember saying my elevator pitch to many people, saying, I came from a science background, I was really interested in the intersection of science and society. That's what led me into this bioethics program. I'm really interested in consulting because I feel like I'm able to solve problems using existing frameworks, which I did in bioethics, and thus I'm really interested in the pharmaceutical industry because there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of tension, and there's a lot going on right now with payers, physicians, providers. So again, just your elevator pitch might change depending on what you're applying for, but just be prepared that bioethics might raise some eyebrows, but turn that around and use that to empower you when you're applying, and really impress who you're talking to, so that they leave the interview saying, "Wow, this person is really cool, and they have some cool interests, and they already know how they're going to leverage their experience. So I really want them, in my company." So that would be, my best advice, especially for those who are new or joining the workforce and looking to understand how they can leverage their background, which might be unique or different than others who are applying to the same jobs that you are.
Great. Well, what a great breadth of experiences from industry to academia, law, medicine, doing research, working in research ethics, clinical ethics, working for nonprofits and policy, etc. So that's great. I thought we would open the floor up and see if people have questions. Either online if you're watching via live stream, please don't be shy, and or here in the room. Yes, Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer Cohen. This is my second year in the Bioethics Program. I have a question for Samantha. How well did you feel the clinical ethics practicum prepared you for, or if you took it, that prepared you, and how much do you feel that you're sort of creating the job of clinical ethics at your hospital, and how much do you feel like it was already there and established and you're fitting into something that's already ongoing?
So I did all three of the ethics courses in the program, the introduction, the advanced clinical ethics, and then the practicum, and I did that at the VA for a long period of time, and that's where I sort of learned many of the skills. And in terms of, I think it prepared me well, but I think it's sort of lifelong learning, that every case is slightly different, and you sort of have to go back to your you know, the basics and your sort of ability to kind of work through a problem. The program's quite advanced where I am. There's, you know, Dr. Finns has been there for a long time and has an established program in the hospital, but the division is growing. So, you know, that's sort of, it's changing, the nature of how we do the work and how we teach and how we're trying to sort of bring more teaching into the process of doing the consultations. But I don't think I will ever feel that I am, you know, I've got it. You know, it's you know, I think the program gave me a great foundation. I had the advantage of having some clinical experience from my prior professional work, which helped me a lot. But I think if you're going to do the work clinically, you have to sort of be prepared that you're going to be learning forever.
Yes, Jared.
I was fortunate to take the clinical practicum at Lenox Hill Hospital under Barry Huberman, and the lessons you learn from that, patients saying goodbye to life, you know, when they're still able to do that, and you take that with you throughout your life. I mean, it's amazing. So any of you who have that opportunity, I would say, I would strongly recommend it, because you will bring that, you will be enriched by it in many ways, and it's valuable.
John, did you have a question? No. Other questions?
Actually, I did.
No. Well, first we'll go to Charlene. Okay.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlene Safi. I just started the program, so a couple months in, I came straight from undergrad as well as some of you here. I guess for me, I have pretty broad interests with this program, so I'd love to do something global related, whether it's like with the UN or different organizations globally. Does anyone have any advice specifically in that field? I don't know specifically what, but I mean, my options are very open at the moment, but yeah.
Well, I would say just, so our panelists here, all as it turns out, are working in the US. We do have a number of alums who are working overseas who unfortunately couldn't come. But there are, again, I would take the same take-home message, which is to network. So we do have connections with people at the United Nations, with other international groups in New York, with the Ford Foundation, and so I think students who have global interest should talk to us, the faculty, and we all know people, and even here at Columbia, there are faculty who work in the School of Public Health, for instance, on international global health issues, and we can help network you with them. And through the, I think you've having just begun, you'll see next semester in the global bioethics course, which is not yet taken, we have about half the lectures are from people working in global health in different capacities who come in to talk, who work on global human rights issues in health, or work on Ebola, for instance. And so you'll see through the program we offer a number of opportunities and chances to interact with people. So stay tuned.
Yeah, that actually made me think of, so I took most of my electives up at Mailman. I'm sure there's still a broad variety of choices, but taking classes with the Mailman students, a lot of them had very similar interests where they were interested in public health, maybe global public health, and see what courses interest you up at Mailman, and network with those students, because a lot of them, you might find a lot of shared interests. And keep in mind that there's a lot of folks you can meet outside of our program with all of the electives you take. You could take a law course, a business school course, a CEPA course. So a lot of, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure novel. To choose the electives, just try to figure them out early, because I remember scheduling and getting into some of the courses was fun, for lack of a better word.
We've solved a lot of that.
Okay, great. But yeah, just take those courses, meet with those people, and network with those students, because a lot of them, there's so many people up at Mailman that have those interests that I met, and a lot of them are at really cool places.
We have Jianhua, who's one of our alums.
I just want to add in Patrick said, we were classmates, we were graduated in 2013, 14, I don't remember. So I took a human rights class, two human rights class, and those professors actually work with UN, extremely extensive background, so they really try to offer internships in the UN. So if you are interested, that's what I think the opportunities are from the human rights department. And also I think if you take 2 class and 2 additional, some here can also get a human rights certification on top of this bioethics program, if that's something interests you. I just want to advise that, because it's something I know.
Thank you. Other questions? John?
So John Zukowski. I'm a first year student in the program as well. Also in similar boat, like all over the place trying to figure things out. One area I am interested in would be publishing, and I'd be interested, because this could apply to any of you, just your understanding of what it's like publishing in bioethics specifically, job opportunities, what you should be doing to get ready for that, all that kind of stuff.
So if I can I'll just make a few comments. So one is, November 16th, we have publishing in bioethics. We've had a number of students involved in publishing. One was someone who worked for Columbia University Press, who then did the bioethics program, who stayed in publishing. And also, we've had a few people who are journalists who've done the bioethics program. So I think there's a lot of opportunities both on the editorial side, and also it's a growing area. In fact, one of our students who will be speaking in November just became editor-in-chief of a new bioethics journal that's being funded by a major funder, who I don't want to give away too
So
much.
mysterious.
But there are many opportunities, but I'll see, I don't want to speak too much, so I don't know if anyone on the panel might have thoughts.
Well, one thought. The law school has a law review, the Columbia Journal of Science and Technology, and I was able to co-author. I wrote a chapter. So if you don't want to feel that you can't do the entire work, you can think about co-authoring, a segment and so forth, and that will get you in the publishing realm as well. And I think those are wonderful opportunities also. So Columbia Law School Science and Technology Law Review.
I would say a couple things, and I think a lot of this you'll probably hear at the publishing panel, but when you're looking at a journal to publish in, if it's an academic journal, they're going to have very rigorous rules about how they want you to cite something, or about how many words they want your piece to be. So when you're going to actually, this is very logistical, but when you're going to actually submit something, just make sure you follow the rules, because otherwise they're just not going to look at it. But second, kind of the other side of that coin is I would think broadly about where you want to submit something. So, not to put a negative light on it, but you can get ready for rejection. I've had tons of stuff rejected. If you get rejected, don't get dejected. And I would say submit your stuff elsewhere, because it's not necessarily that it's not of good quality. Maybe that journal published something very similar, in the issue prior, and that leads into my third point, which is do your lit reviews before you actually write something, because if someone is making the same points as you are, it's not that there's no point in publishing it, but you want to be thinking differently, maybe about the same issues, but you can put your own spin on it. So that would be my advice.
Go ahead.
I just piggyback on one thing that Lillian said as well, as far as just thinking broadly about sort of where you want to publish, but also what kind of work you want to publish. So I'm sure many of you are doing the journal, which I remember we were a part of the cohort that started that, and it was a lot of fun and it was great. And I think, so I do writing on the side as well, and still do, and my work that I do for writing is much different than the work that I do actually to get money. But the writing work that I do is far more related to bioethics, and part of the way that I haven't been able to publish in the Journal of Bioethics or anything like that, but smaller magazines I've had some success with. So for example, I have a connection to one magazine called The New Inquiry, which is an online thing. And the way that I was able to make a connection with some of the editors there was I showed them some of the work that I did with the journal. I showed them a piece that was bioethics related that I wanted to publish with them, and eventually I ended up working with someone there, and since then I've published 3 things with them. So like, and you build small resumes wherever you go, and you sort of compile, okay, now I've got all these things that I've published, let me show this to the next journal or magazine or whoever that I'm interested in publishing with.
So when we say the journal, it's Voices in Bioethics.
Yeah, yeah.
And do you want to, maybe Sarah, do you want to talk about Voices in Bioethics?
Sure. So I'm editor-in-chief of the Voices in Bioethics, an online journal at Columbia University. It's a great student-run journal it's kind of a runoff project of the Bioethics Program, and we write and publish on any number of topics from law and bioethics to clinical narratives, and we also run a summer essay contest, which we are just starting to publish the winners from the summer, but we have received international submissions for that contest and received stellar submissions. So to your point, I've heard of some successes with publishing a wide range of articles with the Voices in Bioethics Journal, and really building up your resume of publications, and then using that as kind of a portfolio to show, like, New York Times, here is all of my written work, and it's stellar, and here you go, and please consider me for a position.
Yeah, so I just want to give a little plug. So I think in the first year, Voices in Bioethics had 60,000 independent hits, independent viewers, and I think Derek, actually, you had a piece that you wrote was then anthologized in a book.
Yeah.
A piece that he wrote for our online journal, and again, it's student run. So we have those of you who are here. You don't have to be a Columbia student. You don't have to be a Columbia bioethics student. We have people who are assistant professors and people from other countries, other schools, undergraduates, graduates who get involved in editing. You could be an assistant editor, et cetera. We have that each piece is edited by other students, which gives you also a great set of skills. Looks good on the resume too, that you've been editing, not just writing. But it's really a wonderful venue, and we encourage you to look at it. And the website is?
voicesinbioethics.org.
I think we have an online question, yes?
We do. We have a question from Stella Tan, and this is for Samantha. She's asking, I wonder if you might be able to provide an example of the kinds of cases that come up for you as a clinical ethics consultant.
Okay. Yes, I can. We had a gentleman just last week who needed to have his leg amputated and very much did not want to have his leg amputated. And so we were called because the surgical team needed to know whether it was ethical to either accept his refusal or to amputate over his objection, and to try to help the team find their way through that question, and to determine whether this gentleman had capacity to make that decision for himself, and what his true preferences were, even if he didn't necessarily have full capacity. Was there some indication of what his preferences were that should inform us? Who was there to help represent him and help us understand what his preferences might be? Yeah, that was one morning last week.
Good questions. Yes, Jade.
Hello, I'm Jade. I recently just graduated from undergrad, and this is my first semester here in the Bioethics Program. For those who come from other professions, I was just wondering, was there ever a time after you've taken your bioethics curriculum that you look back on your profession and you realize something that you didn't realize before that related directly to your education?
It's a really good question.
Okay. Yes. I was involved with robotics and the use of DNA that was not intended. Questions like that came up in my former position with the Navy, and I saw that as a direct link to teaching, some of the things that I teach about, autonomous vehicles now, autonomous robotics for medicine, all of these issues. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's that intersection that it's so obvious. Some things I was not allowed to talk about because of classification issues, but I always say this is not classified, and I don't go into those areas, and you can still do that. So because a lot of what I did formally was classified, but there are ways that you can still talk about in general, things. So yeah, there are those connections, and I was able to bring it into the bioethics that I teach now. Yes.
I think for me, and I'm not sure if Sam would agree, but or Jared or anyone up here went to different grad school before coming for the master's. I think bioethics is so unique in that it's incredible. I mean, the basis of it is interdisciplinary, and it's only strengthened when you have more thoughtful voices in the room coming from different perspectives. So I think when I go back and I think about my law school education as compared to my education in the bioethics program, certainly when you're in graduate school, whether it's medicine, law, you are learning to think in the way that a lot of people in that profession think. But when you go out into the real world, you're dealing with real human beings who aren't all lawyers or aren't all doctors and aren't coming at a particular issue with a particular perspective. And I think looking back on law school, having had the master's in bioethics program, I mean, I almost wish everyone in any professional degree that touches or that is interested in healthcare gets a degree in bioethics, because I think that it shows you how to talk like a human being to other people who are confronting really difficult issues, or for instance in clinical ethics are confronting issues at a moment of crisis. And so how do you interpret some really complicated concepts that maybe you learned in law school or in a PhD program, let's say, and how do you convey them in plain English to the people that you're dealing with? And I think that the Master's in Bioethics program really kind of informed retroactively that for me.
I think in medical school, this happens all the time, because medical schools notoriously, by and large, don't give enough attention to bioethics and medical ethics as they should. So in some ways, one of the reasons I went into bioethics is because I was disappointed that as a physician, I was being asked to make these decisions, say that someone is do not resuscitate, tell family members about someone dying or making difficult choices, and we were given no training in this at all. And so bioethics, in a way, is to give people training to then deal with these issues, either as physicians or nurses, or as bioethicists, or as lawyers, or as IRB members, or as research coordinators, et cetera, et cetera. So it really is in response to the fact that these issues are not dealt with by and large in other professional schools that we have bioethics. Other questions? Don't be shy.
I have a
yes.
comment. I was just thinking this is such an interesting time for you all to be exploring bioethics. There's always been conflict and division in the world, but especially now, I'm wondering for you on the panel, I know for me, I've experienced it that, nobody raises eyebrows now when you talk about bioethics, because the way things are going, we can almost push everybody in the White House to get a degree in bioethics.
That's right, or just ethics.
Do you find that, so it's important, obviously, our voices in bioethics, but I think these voices need to become even stronger. Yeah. And I'm finding that, the degree and the experience resonate, every day when I pick up that New York Times and I read about the latest fiasco, it just resonates more, and I'm so grateful for the knowledge I gained through the program and through the legal aspects of the program. Do you feel that, especially in these times, bioethics has become even more important and more critical?
So I would say definitely.
I think that in these times that I think about when I think about bioethics relevance doesn't even have to do with that current political climate, just more of the way science and medicine is going, it's fast-paced. The innovation is just coming at us left, right, and center. And so, like in research, we for a long time nobody thought about a day when research would involve using apps and software, right? Or a day when robots will become involved in medicine. And I'm sure they will now, we'll probably soon start seeing them getting involved in research. And so we have to tackle those. And something that I learned from the bioethics program is policy and all the regulations, they don't move at a pace that is parallel to innovations. And so we, as the professionals working in the field, have to tackle these issues as they come, while waiting for policy and all of that to follow suit, which they probably will decades after. And so, like, now we're seeing lots of apps. We have, like, now we're seeing studies using virtual reality, and it's like, whoa, what is happening? How do we handle this? Where is the guidance? There's no guidance. So you have to, make a decision as an institution and hope that you can talk to other people about it. So even just stepping away from the political climate, just the world in general is, and I think we have a lot of, the mantle is on us, because when we study bioethics and we talk about different research studies that caused bioethics to become a thing, that caused federal regulations to become a thing, we look back and we criticize them and the decisions they make, and we say, what were they thinking? We can't defend them because it's like, what were you thinking? How could you possibly let this happen? How could you possibly do this? Then now I'm thinking in my work, well, 20 years from now, if someone looks at this study, are they going to say, what were they thinking? Like, if they see my name attached to something, am I going to... So, and it's hard to be that clairvoyant and see what's coming in the future. But, these are definitely interesting times.
I was going to say, from the medical education side, you would think that it would be a growing interest, and we fight very hard for our ethics hours in the medical school curriculum. It's a fight, and it is, the students are more and more research and more less patient time, more research time, and ethics is considered a soft curriculum, and not more than 10 hours in a year for the medical students, and
that shows such a lack of vision, on the part of the powers that be.
It does vary by medical school, but unfortunately that does happen.
I want to say one thing. I learned from taking mental health law here as part of the program. Robert Levy taught, there was a judge in mental health law, and he had what he called a show and tell, which knew things that you would read about in the New York Times, for that week, he would discuss. Well, I've used that now in all my classes, that if there's a topical interest that's hot, literally off the press, I will bring that into the discussion early on in that class and then go with my regular lecture. So I don't ignore it, and do that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we're living and breathing, issues that need the application of, the principles and stuff. And you are all experts, so loud voices in bioethics. We should change it to very loud voices in bioethics.
I think also, I think also just because, oftentimes, like, for example, like among friends or in the office, when something like political is happening and my friends know that I did bioethics, they're like, oh, well, what's the ethical take on that? But I do think beyond that there's really like there's a way that bioethics really can address some of the political mess that's going on right now. So for example, things that were going on with gun violence and questions about gun control and things like that. And I remember when I was in the program, I actually, after reading Adrian Ash, who wrote like this article about big tent bioethics and trying to argue for expanding what the field discusses, I spent my thesis working with Arthur Kuflik to write about bioethics and gun violence. And so anytime something about gun violence happens and gun control and those questions come up, I'm instantly back to where I was thinking about my thesis and thinking about how useful bioethics would be in this discussion and how it's a voice that's not brought into these discussions. And so I really do think that in a variety of political situations, this bioethics training that we're receiving is applicable.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think in fact, we had a few panels about 2 years ago that are on our website called Teaching Bioethics, Use Them Across the University. So we had the person who teaches ethics in the journalism school, the person who teaches ethics in the law school, the person who teaches ethics in political science department and philosophy, et cetera, et cetera. None of them had ever met before, which I thought was interesting. And of course, bioethics. But these are visible on our website, as I said. One thing that came across, though, is that in many fields, ethics students feel is really imposed from the outside. Whereas in medicine, students are hungry for it by and large. Professors, the deans may think, well, we got to teach more science. But in fact, in medicine, students are having to wrestle with these issues every day. And physicians are, and lawyers are, in many, many cases, dealing with health law. And in bioethics, it's really a version of a branch of applied ethics. So we have, as a required course, philosophy of bioethics, working with a philosopher, because I would argue we provide a framework, has been suggested, on drawing on bioethical principles in sort of the DNA and the very structure and framework of what we do. And that training, actually, I think, has much broader implications and can, in fact, be applied elsewhere. So concepts of what are people's rights, what is justice, what are the risks of doing something, what are the benefits. You could apply this to many, many instances, from gun violence to what's going on with Korea. And so, again, I think these are principles that, moving forward, I would hope that our students or alums do apply to other situations where I think there's a need to think critically and to think carefully about ethics. I would say I think part of the problem, too, is because traditionally many people got their ethical and moral compass from religion, from going to church or temple or synagogue or mosque, whatever. And I think most Americans go to religious institutions less than they did, less than our grandparents did. Some Americans still go, it's important, but by and large, I think many people, if you look at statistically and throughout Western Europe, attendance at religious institutions is down. And I would argue that, in fact, there is a loss of moral compass in our society more broadly, politically and elsewhere. And I think that bioethics can provide a model for using ethical principles in an applied way to help stimulate and inspire us toward a better world. Yes?
So I'm an undergrad here right now, and I'm wondering, as someone who's planning on going to medical school, if it would be better to do the master's program first or the medical school?
So I would say I would do the master's program first. And the reason is because there are studies that show that medical students start out as more idealistic and become more jaded. And I think as medical students, I think before you go to medical school, you're more open to an ethical framework and to think about these issues, not just from, I have this much loan money to pay back, I'm going to let that guide the decisions I make in practice. So we've had a lot of students who do our program, then go to med school. It makes them a better doctor, helps them get into med school, get to a better medical school often. But that aside, I think students are more open to it earlier on. And it gives them, I think, going to medical school, which in many ways is a somewhat flattening experience, I think that having another perspective to bring to it could make it better. Yes?
Hi, I'm Paula. I have may I ask some questions?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one is for Patrick. Can I ask you, how does it look like one day at a consulting firm? Okay, I know that my question is a bit weird, but I come from an academic background, working at the university, and basically, I don't know, on an everyday basis, how is it?
So on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, like an example of one mission you had to deal with a pharmaceutical industry. And the second question is about, like it's for everyone, if you have a job on the side, is it realistic to do the program in 1 year, in 2 years, and so on? And if you take the program online, do you lose the benefits of the network, of the networking activities, basically?
Right, well, I can take the first question. So yeah, my day-to-day life, it was a transition going from, academia my whole life to a consulting environment. One thing I do like, it's very fast-paced. And so I think that's what a lot of people who go into consulting like. They like tackling projects and saying, hey everyone, we have 3 months to tackle this. And that's what we have allocated. So I think it works well for people that like a more fast-paced environment. Also, everything is done in teams, so you're very, very rarely ever working in a silo. You're working in small teams, so usually around 3 to 5, working directly with a client team as well. And so it works well for people that like working in teams, that are people. So individuals who like working with people. We get a lot of folks from academia who maybe just feel a little bit siloed or a little bit isolated in academia and are ready for something that is a little bit more team-based. A typical project, like I said, is usually like 3 months. It can be a lot longer. For example, I was on like a year-long project when we were working with a client on the West Coast, all about they wanted to take reduce their timelines from the time where they have the final protocol to the first patient in. They wanted to reduce that by 25%. So that was their goal. And we basically had a year to figure out how to do that, and then how to implement that and how to measure it. So it was a big task, but again, it was a lot of fun, and it was fun to kind of challenge yourself and think about how can we deliver results, because at the end of the day, we're expected to not only have a great idea and great methodologies, but to deliver results. So hopefully that helps kind of understand what it's really like on a day-to-day basis.
I can take the second 2 questions and feel free to chime in. So when I was a student in the program, I was working full-time at the beginning and taking, I don't remember, maybe 2 or 3 classes at a time. And then I decided to just go full-time into the program. And I think that as long as you're good at time management, or that you strive to be good at time management, I think that having a part-time or even sometimes a full-time job and doing a few classes is definitely doable. And for the most part, and I'm not sure where you are in academia, but you're using a different part of your brain and perhaps a different part of your soul when you're in class. So I think I mean that truly. I mean, so I think that it doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort except for the time management aspect of it. And then in terms of the networking, if you're online, certainly it's nice to be in an in-person class with your classmates, but as the online space grows, I think that the people that the program draws from across the country, and actually internationally too, have really diverse, interesting backgrounds. And so I think that, the classes are seminar style online as well, so they're small enough, you get to know one another. There's an online space where you can kind of interact with each other outside of class, and then when you do see one another at conferences or what have you, it's really nice to kind of make that face-to-face connection, but I think it's certainly doable.
And I would just say for our online students that we work very closely with them as faculty and often plug them into bioethics networks wherever they're living. So if they're in San Francisco, we'll have them meet with bioethics in San Francisco, et cetera. And even like this event now is being live streamed so that people who are online can also watch it. So so we try, and others, as was mentioned, there's a number of our online students do go to the national meetings. We have a chance to interact with them, and we encourage people to really open up our own networks to help our students, et cetera. Yes,
just Ashley. A quick question for Patrick going off of that. Do you travel a lot, like to your the companies, or is it a lot of remote work?
It's really both. There's projects where the clients are very hands-on, and they might be assigned to that project, and so they want their team in with you at all times, and then you travel to the client for meetings and working sessions. There's also projects that are more market research driven, so a lot of that work can just be done remotely. You might be interviewing 50 doctors or 20 patients or 30 decision makers at insurance companies, and so that work doesn't need to be done at where the client is, so it just depends on the project. Both have advantages. It's great to be on site and brainstorm with the client team who, they're the one that's really experiencing this challenge and they're the one most invested in the success, but it just depends on the nature of the engagement and what makes sense and where the work can best be done.
We have another online question, one of our online viewers.
Yeah, so this question is from Eleanor Dega. She's curious about the intersection of bioethics and public health ethics and the tension between the two and the kind of career that would highlight the differences between the two outside of academia and policy.
Well, I would just say public health ethics is really a branch of bioethics. So within bioethics, there's neuroethics, there's reproductive ethics, there's clinical ethics, there's research ethics, there's animal ethics, there's public health ethics. And I think public health ethics really, and we have some of the people who founded public health ethics are part of our program. So Ron Bayer, for instance, who's really one of the leaders in public health ethics, and James Colgrove, who are on our board, and James Colgrove was one of our core faculty members up until this past year when he's had to take on a lot of other responsibilities in the university, but is still closely involved with us. And public health ethics, I think, basically says that whereas in a lot of clinical ethics, patient autonomy is extremely important, in public health ethics, we often need to do surveillance work. So we need to find out how many people in a community develop cancer, for instance, and we need to record that information so we can see if there's an outbreak of cancer at a particular intersection, or if there's an outbreak of an infectious disease among people who live in a particular town, we need to do something. So we need to track that. So we in fact get a lot of data that normally we would need to get patient consent for, but we collect it in the name of public health because there's a greater good, and we trust public health departments to keep that data, I was going to say under lock and key, but encrypted, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those are some of the tensions. I would say that they're not really tensions, however, that there are many instances in bioethics where we say that in the name of safety, we mandate that everyone wears a seatbelt, for instance, which is, quote, public health ethics, but clearly part of bioethics too. In other words, same with quarantine, with infectious disease. So there's a long history of public health issues being very much front and center in bioethics. So again, the question is, do you say, well, there's mathematics, or here's 25 different branches of mathematics? And so with bioethics as well, I prefer to think that there's one large tent. You may focus in neuroethics or research ethics or ethics in the pharmaceutical industry or ethics in policy, and that's why we have courses in neuroethics, reproductive ethics, environmental ethics, clinical ethics, global ethics, et cetera, but they're really all, I would say, parts of a whole.
And I just wanted to kind of chime in on that. I think bioethics largely in the U.S. focuses on autonomy, but I think if we kind of expand the lens and look at global bioethics, I think justice is a larger kind of we place larger emphasis on justice in that realm. And so I think that's very much in line with the public health agenda.
Yes, correct. I mean, there's also sort of American bioethics. There's, there are questions. Is there an Indian bioethics? Is there a Chinese bioethics? I think this is a larger topic, but I think that there are certain principles that pretty much everyone would agree to. How you apply them and interpret them and weigh them against each other in particular situations may vary. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
Adding to that point, in the clinic with tuberculosis patients, there's often a tension at play where patients say, well, it's very paternalistic for the public health department and New York City at large to enforce directly observed therapy where we monitor adherence to antibiotic treatment. And so how do we deal with that? Ultimately, the clinic wants patients to get better. TB used to be called consumption, so they're getting sicker and sicker if they're not on medication. So ultimately, TB is a curable disease. They will get better. And it will just take time, but on the other hand, the public health risk is quite significant. They are contagious. If their lungs are contagious, they can spew the bacterium into the air and infect other people. And that's a significant risk to the public, and we do lock people up in Bellevue still as a result. So those are some significant tensions at play, but ultimately most of the patients I work with tend to comply with treatment and with directly observed therapy, and they do adhere to treatment. So there is no risk to the New York City population, but those tensions are still at play.
Yeah, it's just to highlight, if someone with active tuberculosis starts coughing in a subway car, it's endangering everyone in the subway car. So in the name of public health, we often say, this is a treatable disease, you just need to take your medication to make sure you get better. We have time for maybe one last question, if anyone. Don't be shy. Yes?
This is for, I guess, Patrick. So I have a science background, and I came here after working a little bit in a hospital setting and things like that. And I'm planning to, after graduation, go into more of a corporate setting, and smaller or whatever happens. But so like I'm not really familiar with any of the, I guess, lingo that goes on with the, it's kind of like a different field in itself. And so I know you mentioned like your elevator pitch and things like that. So what were some of the things that you kind of had like an ace in the hole, or like where there's some of the things that you said were that kind of piqued their interest, so you could kind of, like you said, mention it like an intersection of what their interests are and what your interests are.
I think it's problem solving. So a lot of times consulting companies in their interview process, they use what's called a case study or a case interview. So what that is it's not just tell me about a time where you worked in a team, but it's tell me, it's walking you through a problem and seeing how you would solve the problem. So you know, you are designing this clinical trial protocol. What are 3 things you would keep in mind in doing this? And so honestly, a lot of my job, it's a lot of soft skills, and that's one thing I think I took away from the bioethics program, is that this field takes empathy, and that's a big part of it, is understanding, putting yourself in other people's shoes. So a lot of my job, because there's also a client management perspective, it's really about reading the room. Is this person bought into my recommendation, or are they skeptical? Is this, did I convince them with my data? Are they confused? So I think what stands out is problem solving and being able to think in a very structured, being able to solve problems in a structured manner. I'm sure in a clinical consult, there's probably certain frameworks or methodologies that you use to solve that problem. And so I think it's the problem solving, it's thinking and solving problems in a very structured way, or at least starting with the framework. Obviously the 4 principles of bioethics comes to mind as kind of, if you're completely stuck on a problem, you might want to at least consider that framework to solve the problem. And then I think it's, again, it's really the soft skills, at least in my experience. I'm sure this is true of any industries, public or private. It's, are you a good communicator? Can you influence folks with impact? Are you a good speaker? Are you a good team player? Are you rubbing people the wrong way with your personality? Or are you really taking others' emotions into consideration? So I think, you know, back to thinking about bioethics, it's really, I think, understanding empathy and where everyone's coming from. So again, a huge part of my job is just problem solving, thinking in a structured manner, and then you know, really don't de-emphasize those soft skills, and you know, be a nice person. Don't be a jerk, basically.
That's my job. That's the same job I have.
And I would just say we're fortunate to have a terrific career department here, career services, that helps our students. And again, just like everything else, it's, you know, I would encourage you to reach out to them. They're not going to come knocking on your door. They have many events. And we encourage you to contact them. They're there for you. They help our students with their elevator pitch. They help our students with CVs, with sort of strategizing, looking for jobs, with getting jobs. They have job lists, job fairs, and healthcare and other areas. So again, you know, I would take advantage of all those opportunities. Just any final thoughts from our panelists?
I would say it goes very quickly. And use every single resource the school has to offer you. Meet everybody you can possibly meet. Put your hand out, say who you are. You know, you may feel shy, you may feel like you're a student. Who are you to go up to the professor? Introduce yourself, share yourself, and your network and your world will just open. And that's how you will find your path.
Well said. Well, I think, oh, did you want us to add?
Yeah, just one thing. When you do find opportunities that you're interested in and you put your resume out and you get invited for an interview, one advice that I have is to reach out to people who are in similar fields, or even the person who recommended you, for if you want, just for a run through of what your interview would be like. If you want tips on what, I think that would be very helpful. Myra did that. She did that, and I didn't even know I was going to be interviewing her. And then I came in and I was like, okay, well, she already talked, so, you know. But I think, and I had done that with Dr. Willits, who recommended that I apply for the position. So I'd done that, and that helps you think about all the, because you have a lot of things that you're thinking about, you have a lot of things that you've learned, you have what your ideas are of how you can apply what you've learned to the role, but you've not been in that role. So it helps running the things that you want to say and the ideas that you have by somebody who's been in that position or in that field. I think that really helps.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.